All right, we're rocking and rolling. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the first official ADHD KC parent meeting of 2024, which is insane. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm Jeremy Didier. I am the co-founder and co-coordinator of ADHD KC. And my co-presenter tonight is one of my best friends ever, Jane Indergaard. And we're going to take turns introducing ourselves a little more in depth in just a few minutes. But before we dive in, just wanted to let you know that because this is a CHAD presentation, I have to read the disclaimer. And so CHAD does not endorse or support or recommend any specific treatment or provider or clinic. So you are responsible for doing your own research. But we always err on the side of coming from an evidence-based perspective. And we're going to do that here tonight as well. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. And we'll get to those probably at the end. I think that's going to be the easiest since we're going to kind of be going back and forth. Let's see. I'm trying to move this into presenter mode and it doesn't seem to like that. I don't know why.
And I can't get rid of the record got it screen.
So let's see. So can you guys see that? Did it go away? No? Dang it. Well, here we were going to be all fancy and use Canva. And now we're going to have to try something a little bit different, which we can. No biggie. We are nothing else if not flexible. All right, we'll try this again. Take two. Okay, this is what we're doing. Can you guys see that? Give me the thumbs up again or the wave. Sweet. Thank you. Okay, so the title of tonight's presentation is What's Fair Got to Do with It? Nurturing Neurotypical Siblings in the ADHD Home. And it's presented by Jane and myself. We do have some other disclaimers, believe it or not, in addition to the one that I just shared with you. Basically, this is informational purposes. It's not intended to replace, the care and treatment that you're going to get from your qualified practitioner, and you should always check with your doctor before beginning or making any changes for your ADHD management or those of your kids. The other disclaimer I should throw out there is that Jane and I do present either together or individually for CHAD at various places throughout the nation. And we often present for other organizations that have ADHD focused. I do occasionally present for PESI and they pay me when that happens. It doesn't happen very often, but I like to disclose that when it does. What else? Jane presents for at work.
Work and World Federation for ADHD I presented and
yep.
But I don't get paid for any of that either.
I know. And then sometimes when they do offer to pay us, we say, no, just
no, yes,
donate
exactly.
it. Yeah. Or pay for our travel or something. But yeah, so those are our disclaimers. And this is us. You want to go first, Jane?
Sure. I love this picture. Jeremy, and pardon my voice too. I've got a cold I'm getting over and come and go. So we'll see how it goes. But I love this picture. Jeremy and I met exactly 10 years ago. When both of our chapters won Chapter of the Year through the International or through National CHAD organization. And following that, shortly thereafter, we were invited to attend a Chris Dendy Executive Function Training Retreat where we shared a room and found out we had a whole lot in common. So we're both left-handed, we both are in the same birth order, we have the same number of siblings and the same gender-related balance of siblings, etc. And even more ironically, we both played the exact same roles in our high school musicals. And which is interesting, we're both from the Midwest. I'm from North Dakota. And so we started calling ourselves the twins, even though I'm a bit older and look quite different. So this half of the twin pair, Jane Indergaard, I'm an associate professor at the Sanford Heimer School of Health Professions at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. And I've been involved in researching and working in the field of ADHD for about 20 years. It's been a labor of love, of course, and my specialty is actually developing and providing targeted psychoeducation for various groups, various populations. It's kind of an area that I truly, truly love. But most of all, I'm proud of the fact that I am a wife and mother and grandmother. I have 3 adult children with ADHD. Each of them has a different flavor. And then I was diagnosed with ADHD after my kids were diagnosed with ADHD, and it remained to be seen whether or not those grandkids have it. So that's my half of the twin ship. So back to
And I love it because as we go throughout the talk, you'll see that, we're kind of at different places on the child continuum. Jane's kids are all adults and all live independently and are married and have kids of their own, some of them. And, I still have some kids at home. I'm kind of in the in-between space, I guess. And so I'm Jeremy Didier. I'm like I said, the co-founder and co-coordinator of ADHD KC. I was recently elected to be the president of CHAD, which is terrifying. But I do have a day job. I'm a licensed master social worker and a licensed master addiction counselor. I currently work at the Jordan Psychological Center, but I do a lot of work with justice-involved individuals at the Johnson County Correctional Facility. Let's see, I have 5 kids, and yes, I should have known I had ADHD a long time ago, because clearly my husband and I had some challenges with impulse control, which is how we ended up with all those children. The oldest is 25, and he does not have ADHD. Our daughter is 23. She has ADHD and some other fun things. And then Theo is 20. He was the first one to get diagnosed. He was diagnosed when he was 3. And I was diagnosed right after he was. And then we have Isaac, and he's a senior in high school, and he has ADHD. And we have a surprise child. We have Josh, and he's 9, and he has ADHD also. The 9-year-old and the 20-year-old both have ADHD, autism, dysgraphia, and dyslexia. And so it's been an interesting journey, to say the least. And so, when that 20-year-old was diagnosed with ADHD, he was our 3rd kid. He was 3. We thought we may know what we were doing, maybe a little bit, because again, he was our 3rd kid. But we clearly didn't have a clue. And I saw this quote and I thought it was perfect. I don't know if you guys can see that, but basically parenting a child with ADHD, and maybe even parenting any child at some point, is a little bit like trying to build a plane mid-flight. Stressful, right? And you're not always completely sure where the parts go, and you have to make some decisions like in the moment. And I think it's really easy to get to a space where you're like, if I don't make the right decision here, the plane's going to fall apart. Thankfully, that doesn't happen that often. These are just some fun statistics that many of you probably know already. Anywhere between 7.5% to 11% of kids have ADHD, depending on what research study you're looking at. And parenting kids with ADHD is challenging. At least 70% of those kids have one other diagnosis. ADHD rarely travels alone. And most kids with ADHD grow up to be adults who have ADHD. And a lot of those symptoms will go ahead and carry over into adulthood. They may look different, but they will still have a lot of those symptoms. Oh, shoot, let me pull that down a little bit. No shocker here, 81% of households who have a child with ADHD report that their lives are a little bit stressful. And I kind of wonder, I'm like, what's going on in the other 19% of households? Like, how is there no stress there at all? And hopefully we're going to talk about some of those things today that will at least give you some peace in some areas. Oh, I got someone else that wants to join us. Stand by. Okay. And this is the part that's, really stressful, at least from our perspective. Kids with ADHD pretty much cost us 5 times more than the average individual who gets healthcare. And it's not just your healthcare, it's not just medicine and doctor's visits, it's also, therapy appointments and social skills appointments and tutors and time missed from work to take, your kids to all the places. And that's just for the one kid with ADHD. So if you have more than one kid with ADHD, that's another 5 times, another 5 times. So basically we're broke. So I should really probably take the money when they offer us the money to talk, Jane. But as I'm sure you guys know, and we're going to navigate away from talking about the impact on the parent to get to the siblings, but this is a big piece of it. Parenting a kid who has some neurodiversities really impacts every aspect of the entire family's life. Parents of kids with ADHD are highly likely to divorce. We often develop some negative coping skills like drinking. And there was a great study that came out, I think it was a couple of years ago, right, Jane, that talked about the parent leaving the workforce. Mm-hmm. And it was really, really classic. That it was often the mom. And it was right around the time that the kid with ADHD was between the ages of 9 and 11. And they often leave their job, to stay home to help support the kids' needs because they're high need and high demand. And that's, of course, when I initially stopped working full time, was when the now 20-year-old was 11 for the exact same reasons. It was just too much. And so you have higher caregiver burden, whoever that is. You know, if you're fortunate and have a co-parent, then higher caregiver burden for both of you. And it just gets even more challenging at home if you have more than one kid, and most of us do. And particularly if, you know, the other kids have neurodiversities, or even if they're neurotypical, there's challenges all the time. Okay. Go ahead, Jane.
Well, I think Jeremy did a great job of painting all the complex stressors in a household of a child with ADHD. And I think it's one of the things I came across when I was doing some lit reviews for other psychoed that I was developing. And I was gratified by this, that it is now recognized that the daily challenges and strains in the household of people with ADHD in the household mirrors that of households of kids with physical chronic illnesses like epilepsy, diabetes, asthma. And again, that's very validating to recognize that a behavioral health diagnosis like ADHD is as challenging in a household as some of those physical diagnoses. But I would add a caveat to this, and that is I think there's a different layer associated with those of us with ADHD and other behavioral health diagnoses. And that is that ADHD is more hidden, it's less understood. The behaviors are more atypical and they're behavioral symptoms, not physical symptoms. And there's a big myth out there that, you know, we can control and we are willfully controlling behaviors. So I think it's great to recognize how stressful a household with ADHD can be and mirror that it's just as stressful as people with chronic physical illnesses. But I do think there's a whole added layer there. And the stressors in that household don't just affect the parents, right? We all get that. Also, because ADHD is a family thing, you can go to the next slide. It affects the siblings. And the perspectives in a lot of the research was really more from parents with ADHD, teachers with ADHD, some of the providers or people with ADHD themselves. But when we started presenting on this topic, we recognized there wasn't a lot of research out there. And it's getting better. I think we'll bring that up in another slide, but the siblings matter. We know the siblings matter. The sibling relationship is one of the longest relationships in the lifespan, human lifespan for most people. And the sibling relationship is really an important context for learning, for development across the lifespan as well. So in many cases, siblings can also serve as a protective factor for a child. So this quote is, I have to look down. I have a big black square in the middle of my screen, so I can't see all these slides very well. So I'm going to wing it here. Sibling relationships, I love this quote, outlast marriages, survive the death of parents, resurface after quarrels that would sink any friendship, right? They flourish in 1,000 incarnations of closeness and distance and warmth, loyalty, and distrust. So I think siblings can be our closest ally and sometimes our greatest nemesis, but you know what? They're there and they're ours, right? So really important that we think about what's going on to the siblings in a household. And to add one other point, you know, in a household with ADHD, it's very likely that more than one child has ADHD. And we have been asked that question. Well, are you talking about non-affected siblings or siblings with ADHD? And I'm talking about both. And what we'll find is that in a household where there are other children affected with ADHD or other neurodiversities, it is the person that has the most complexity or the biggest issues that gets the attention. So you can have another child with ADHD that may not get the same attention as the most complex child. And that's very similar to the non-affected child. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, excellent point. And as Jane mentioned earlier, you know, there's limited research right now on the impact of ADHD on the neurotypical sibling. And thankfully, that's getting better. Just in the past year or two, there's been several studies that are currently ongoing anyway, looking into the specific topic. So things are getting better, which is great. We'll have a lot more information and data soon. But what do we know for sure right now? Well, we know, and this is probably not surprising, that neurotypical siblings in a family with ADHD experience a reduced overall quality of life. And that's because, and all these things have happened in my home, you know, there's daily high levels of conflict. So, you know, kids are kind of swinging on this emotional merry-go-round or swing set pretty much all the time, not just the neurotypical sibling, the kid with ADHD also. There are times when the child that doesn't have ADHD is like super annoyed by the child that does have ADHD, and vice versa. There's times when the child with ADHD is annoyed just because the other sibling walked into the room. Then the parents are typically upset because it's just not quiet anywhere. There's often conflict between the two parents. My husband always felt like I was too easy on the kids, and I always felt like he was too hard on the kids. And so there was that disconnect there, which did not make things easier. It seemed like, our child with ADHD got a pass on things. He got out of doing certain things because he just couldn't do it. And because sometimes I was just too tired to mess with it. It was easier to leave the restaurant and go home than to stay there and have him melt down in front of everyone and embarrass the whole family. And so in my mind at the time, it made better sense for half the family to stay and have dinner. And we didn't try to go to dinner at a restaurant very often, I'll be honest. But when we did, if someone started to melt down, I was ready to go. We always took 2 cars. But that didn't, lead to a cohesive family unit, because it was rare that we were all together. And there were times when, my neurotypical, well, I don't only have the one neurotypical sibling, he was the oldest. I think he really wanted all of us to be together, and all of us to have like that, like his friends, they would all go out to dinner, they would all sit in front of the TV and watch a show together. That rarely happened in our house. And Jane talked about it a little bit earlier, but, as we were doing the research for this presentation a few years ago now with our kids, it was really interesting to see where they were then and where they are now in terms of how they remember what happened when they were little. Some still are pretty angry, and some have grown up enough to recognize the conflict and still wish it was different, And so I think our hope for this presentation in particular is to let you know that things do change, and that no one family interaction or one, meltdown in public, and even, 50 of them really over time is not going to negatively impact your other kids or your family unit as a whole. Okay. And I just kind of already said that, but I like these pictures. So I thought I'd show this slide, and I'm sure you guys have seen this before. Siblings feel conflicted. I love my brother, but he's a real pain in the butt. And it bugs me because it's hard to have patience for him when he's making my life more difficult. Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, so when we were doing the earlier research, I had done a survey of my kids and then took out some excerpts from the literature of just what these kids were saying their household was like. And so maybe this will resonate with some of you. This is a direct quote. "My parents had a lot of stress dealing with my brother, so I felt I had to be perfect and not give them any trouble." So one of the things we have to guard against is perfectionism or overcompensation by a child who feels guilty for what their parents are going through, for what their siblings going through, trying to make that balance. There are reports of kids getting parentified and actually taking on roles and responsibilities that are probably not developmentally appropriate for them, a lot of burden and responsibility. There are also other reports that say it wasn't that that overcompensation was imposed on them, like by a parent, rather they did it themselves. They just internally felt the need to do that, so it was self-imposed. But either way, it's still very challenging for kids, and so we have to really kind of watch against that. Another quote, "He always got more attention because he wanted more attention." And this quote's from my daughter. "My needs would always be ignored." And actually, one of the things she told me was it wasn't his hyperactivity that was really hard. It was the experience of his needs always overshadowing mine. And this is a daughter that also has ADHD, but hers was inattentive, his was combined type. And so he just drew a lot more attention for it. Next slide. Yeah. "My life was always dependent on my brother's day." And you can see some of the other quotes in here that I can't. So
here, I can read them. Everything revolved around my brother, and it was almost like it had to go his way. And then this one I think is really impactful too. "I got cheated out of things because if we were out and my sister got tired or bored, we would have to go home." And that one happened quite a bit in our family.
Right. And so, what they say is life seems to revolve around the sibling. And guess what? It kind of does. Their perception isn't skewed. It isn't wrong. Yeah. So oftentimes the lesser affected kids or the unaffected kids, really their needs get completely overshadowed.
Yeah. And so, back to the title of this talk, it's not fair. It's not fair. It's not equal. It's not enough. Our kids did not ask to be born to our families or get stuck in a situation where they're surrounded by, other kids with neurodiversities. And it's really challenging for parents to find ways to to make it fair and seem like it's equal, or to be close to enough, if not all the way enough. And it's not surprising then that 76% of kids who are in a family where there's a sibling with ADHD struggle with depression and anxiety at some point in their lives. And so the good news is that we can make it better, but where do we start? And this may seem kind of basic, but it's really important to make sure that we're dealing with the right diagnoses. And so if you haven't already gotten your kid diagnosed or fully assessed, please do that. And I'm not just talking again about the kids, because ADHD comes from somewhere. And so since it's, genetic and highly heritable, if you think you might be the parent who has ADHD that may or may not have been diagnosed, we encourage everyone to get diagnosed, or at least to get evaluated or screened to rule it in or out, because I can't think of a better way, and I've said it before, to honor your kid's journey or to talk about how important these neurodiversities are or how they show up in your family than to go through that journey with them, and talk about how it is for you and the things that you remember growing up. It would be great if everyone's ADHD was the same, but it's a spectrum. And so it's often rare that in one family, you've got several kids that have the same presentation. So sometimes that creates its own challenges, but at least knowing that we're all under this collective umbrella of ADHD gives us a place to start. Establishing routines. Most of you are doing this already. All kids need routines and habits, but kids with ADHD need them more. And as your kids grow and get older, you see the growth and the progress. It's nice to go back and celebrate those little successes. I remember when one kid was in 4th grade and I was frustrated with the morning routine. But when I thought about it, when he was in 3rd grade, we were still getting him dressed in the morning to go to school. He wasn't even dressing himself. And in 4th grade he was. And so that may not seem like a big deal, but it was to us. However, to my daughter, who had been getting herself dressed every morning since she was 2 and ready for school, she did not think that it was that big of a deal. And she was very frustrated by the fact that we were praising him for getting himself dressed in the morning because it wasn't fair. Here she was doing all the things that she was supposed to do, and she had ADHD also. And we were falling all over ourselves to make the son with ADHD and autism, feel proud about getting dressed in the morning. And so therapy is great. Therapy for everyone in the family. All of our kids have been in therapy at some point. I'm a big believer that if you decide to medicate your kids, and it is a personal choice, but I'm pro medicine because I've seen the changes that it can wreak in people's lives to the positive. But if we're going to do the medicine, we got to do the therapy. We got to do the other stuff too, to stay on top of things. And so in some family therapy, at more crisis points in our lives, we've all gone to therapy as a unit. Part of this is understanding ADHD. In my clinical practice, I have parents who will come in and, talk about their kids' symptoms or things that their kids are doing. And it's clearly ADHD. And it's difficult, I think, sometimes to separate the ADHD from the behavior, or particularly when you have kids that are kind of right around like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, kind of that preteen, getting ready to go through puberty age. They have ADHD. Not really sure if the behavior that you're seeing is caused by the ADHD or just caused by maybe they're having a bad day or being a jerk. And that does happen in teenagers sometimes. But really understanding how ADHD shows up for not only for you, but for your kid, for each kid, if you have more than one kid that has ADHD, so that when these things happen, you can recognize it for what it is. Understanding your child's perspective is important, not just your child with ADHD, but the child that may not have ADHD. And none of this stuff is rocket science, guys. This is all going to be stuff that you've probably heard in some way before, but we're hoping that we can give you some really concrete examples to use in your home. Consistent parenting, this is really hard because, like we said, it's not fair and it's not equal. But if you're consistently putting things in place to make sure that everyone knows what the rules are, the main rules, we don't hit, we don't, punch the wall, we don't break other people's stuff. Whatever your house rules are, you can make them vague enough that they apply to all the kids in your house. But you have to be consistent, and there has to be a consistent consequence for breaking those rules. Sorry. And connection. So this is one that's also really important. Probably you guys are doing this already. Now, because you do have to leave in the middle of dinner at the restaurant, it's important to go back with that kid that got left at, not that you're leaving the kid at the restaurant. I'm just saying that, you know, the kid that stayed behind with the other parent or whatever, finding times to have one-on-one time with just you and the kid so that they have date night. They know how special they are. They know that they're important to you, and building that relationship also is very important. Hang on, I'm gonna roll that down there. Okay, so understanding ADHD is important for you as a parent, but it's also important for your kids to understand, and not just the kid with ADHD, you know, the other kid as well, or the other kids, you know, talking about how their siblings' brain works differently, how it tends to show up, things that, you know, your brother with ADHD is likely to do, why that's happening. And then, you know, in other situations, like in public, giving your kid something to say when that happens. And so if someone asks a question, or another kid asks a question, you can say, oh, my brother has ADHD or something like that. However you guys want to phrase it. But I mean, giving them guidelines or just the verbiage to answer, I mean, just having the words, just something to say sometimes is really, really helpful and can take away that kind of fear or embarrassment. That's just the way it is. Or, you know, that's just the way he was made. He has a race car brain and he doesn't have any brakes. And I wish he had brakes, but that's just how his brain works. And then again, like I said, therapy for everyone, if you can find it. Where am I? And so I think sometimes our kids are embarrassed by their siblings and their behavior. And I love this because our kids, all of our kids are different. That doesn't mean that any one of them is better or worse than the other. They're just different. And that's the important piece. And we talk about that at our house quite a bit. Everyone's different. That's the way, that's the way your brain works. So just a little more detail on the consistent parenting piece. You know, setting those limits and being clear on the rules. You know, it is not okay to hurt your brother. It's not okay to punch a hole in the wall. It's not okay to break all the toys. It's not, you know, it's not okay to yell and call me an a-hole. Or if that happens, you know, being consistent with the next step. You know, I think there's a lot of times when kids with ADHD really can't control themselves. And if we're not doing a good job of recognizing what triggers them and giving them, you know, the opportunity to relocate to a different part of the house when things are getting stressful, then, you know, that's when those kind of big blow-ups happen. But we have to do that for everybody. You know, just because your neurotypical child is still calm and doesn't escalate at the same pace that your child with ADHD does, if the neurotypical child says, I need a break, I need to go to my room and think about that for a bit and come back to you, then we have to let them go. You know, you get the break just like the kid with ADHD gets the break. The important part is the coming back together after, you know, the blow up happens or the lack of a blow up. I mean, my gosh, how great is it that a kid might say, I'm getting upset. I think I will go and calm down and come back to you. That rarely happens in my house, but if it did, I'd be like, go, have a great time. Come back down when you're ready to finish the conversation. Because we've seen with our children with ADHD what happens when we don't honor that escalation. And that works really well with your co-parent too, I have found. When you're disagreeing about something, if you notice that you're getting upset, removing yourself from the situation. So consistent co-parenting is also an important piece of this. But we do have to understand or explain to our kids that, yeah, we get it. I mean, it isn't fair and it isn't equal. But there are things that are going to even out over time. And right now, this is the best that your brother can do. And imagine what it would be like if this was the best that you could do. What would that feel like? You know, helping your child kind of switch perspectives also so that they understand, or at least can kind of, you know, empathize to a little extent, you know, what it must be like to go through life, or even just go through the day or third grade, you know, as the kid that gets in trouble quite a bit. That can't be very much fun. So as I said earlier, fair does not always mean equal. I think that's you, Jane.
All right.
Tips.
So it's interesting because when Jeremy was sharing that story, we did have an incident with my daughter. She and her brother butted heads just very severely. They were very close in age. And we were at my son's psychotherapy appointment, and she came in with, because I wanted to try to resolve some of the issues they were having. And the psychotherapist actually surprised me a little bit. He sent my son out, and they were having a huge argument in the office. And he turned to her and he said, kind of what Jeremy was referring to. He said to her, I want to ask you a question. I understand you're frustrated. I see why you're mad, but do you want to change places with him? And the reason I bring that up was it never even occurred to me to help her try to see things from his perspective. And what's interesting is that that was the moment where she started to have empathy with her brother. Now, forward ahead a few years, and what was really funny was something would happen and she'd come to me, I'm so mad, I'm so furious, and I don't want to change places with him, but I can't take this anymore, you know. So that was the kind of the interesting piece. She had empathy, but I still needed to validate her perspective and her feeling. And so I think 3 ways that we can do that to provide that validation to help with that empathetic perspective is to listen actively to our kids, both those affected and unaffected. What is their report about the issues? Let them know that their feelings matter. And I have to admit, I was pretty guilty of basically telling my daughter to suck it up. You know, she was kind of the quiet one, and you suck it up. I'm really busy with him. And it took me a few years to really realize how deeply she was hurting and internalizing all that hurt. So listen and notice, you know, let them know that their feelings do matter. Also, this didn't happen in our household, but watch for either parent or self-imposed parentification, you know, or that perfectionism. If you're noticing that in the child, usually there's behavior, all behavior has meaning, and usually there's something behind that perfectionism. And then also, and I love this, is to notice and build on the compassion. You're trying to build those strong bonds. So provide reinforcement for when you notice, for example, the time that they had their siblings back. You know, the sibling was being picked on after school and the non-affected sibling stepped in, or they expressed empathy. I see you really had a bad day. How would you like this candy bar? You know, so try to notice the empathy both ways when the child with ADHD also expresses kind of empathy and compassion towards their sibling. Next slide.
Yep.
Another really important piece, as everyone knows, is communication. And what was interesting is when Jeremy and I were doing some research on Tourette's syndrome and ADHD, one of the things we found was that good communication in the household, particularly with the siblings, actually did 2 things. It decreased the severity of symptoms of the Tourette's. Isn't that funny? You wouldn't think there's a connection, but it also increased a person's sense of fairness. So the more you communicated with those kids, the more they felt that things were fair, probably because they were getting more educated about the problem. However, when you're in a household with a lot of conflict, like ours was, communication can be hard. People don't want to talk to each other, too far gone, whatever it happens to be. So a couple tips that I think are really helpful are to remember that communication doesn't have to be in person. Sometimes it's just a little too hard. And so what we went to was trying to communicate in the way that our kids did. So send text messages. You know, they'll text back. A couple of things that we did, we put Post-it notes on my son that was driving. We put it on his dashboard about, thanks so much for helping your brother get his homework home last night. It would also be things like, I am really sorry that I overreacted to XYZ last night. Come and talk to me afterwards. It was just opening that door for communication, and it was a little less threatening than face-to-face. So Post-it notes. I'm sure many of you have left notes in your child's backpack or their hockey bag or on their bedroom or bathroom mirror. So that's all really good ways of encouraging communication in the household. And then you encourage the kids to do the same. Which is really interesting. Some of the notes that my daughter sent to her brother were pretty interesting after a period of time. We were presenting at a conference, and one dad spoke up and said that he started Snapchatting. And Jeremy and I had just been talking about how so often parents use social media to kind of, I won't say the word spy, but to kind of keep tabs on their child, right?
I will.
And he said he decided not to do that anymore, but instead to Snapchat his son parts of his day. So it's like, hey, look at, I'm having this for lunch today. What are you having for lunch? And he would do a Snapchat of that. Or, hey, you see this crazy car accident outside my window. What's going on with you today? And actually that opened up a door for a son that was not communicating well with him. And he said that that's persisted now for several years. So again, just another way to do it. Sometimes using somebody other than yourself is a little bit easier. So to recruit a coach or a youth leader, or someone from your extended family who has a good relationship to help provide that communication. And they can do things like, you know, your mom told me that you had done XYZ. Your mom is very, very proud of whatever it happens to be. So sometimes that communication can happen through a third party as you're building towards better communication with each other. So try communicating the way that they do. Next slide. This is one of my favorites, is providing not only one-on-one time. I'm going to go into 3 different time frames here, but time is really important. And again, I have heard children that have said that getting noticed was the most important thing, that one-on-one time, finally having individual time with your parent was what they craved the most and ultimately what empowered them the most to survive in that household. So again, I'm going to split the time into three things. So there's one-on-one time. You got to carve it out. It's not the extent, nor is it the event. It's the fact that you actually sat down with that person one-on-one, because it's very validating to be noticed. And so it can be as simple as 5 minutes on the bed before they go to bed at night, before they go to sleep at night. I just talked to a mom whose daughter has ADHD, who is wrestling. She's a female wrestler. And she had the tournament out in Bismarck, North Dakota, which is 4 hours from here. I'm in Fargo. And she was asked to carpool, and she refused the carpool because she wanted those 4 hours in the car for one-on-one time with that daughter. So those are other creative ways to do that. I used to drop my sons off at their hockey practices, and then I would take my daughter out for a quick dessert at the bakery. So that was kind of our one-on-one time. So carve out that time, be very intentional about that. But a second piece of this is actually family time. And that's because family time helps build relationships among the family and preserve the nuclear family. And in our case, you can see my 3 kids are in the lower part of this picture here, standing in front of the bear. One of my kids was thrilled about history. The other one was a thrill seeker and liked amusement parks. And the third one was an animal lover. So every time we went on vacation, we always did a zoo, an amusement park, and a museum. Every time, one for each kid. And what was really funny is 20 years later, my youngest son, who's on the bottom there, went to a bachelor's party in Las Vegas and went with a bunch of his buddies. And when he came back, I said, how did it go? And they said, well, he made us go to a zoo, an amusement park, and a museum. And so I think that just touched my heart, because it meant a lot to him that we had that kind of memory as a nuclear family. So that was really awesome. And then the third one that I think is really important for the sibling who's not affected is time away. Everybody needs to get back from the front, right? To refuel and refresh. And you've got to find creative ways to do that. In our case, my daughter's best friend was an only child. And so we had the privilege of her accompanying that only child on all of her vacations. So the friend had a companion, and my daughter got away from her brothers. So that's one way. I guess next slide. And then one more thing is modeling the behavior you want your kids to see. We know that's just a basic part of any kind of parenting, but I think it's really important in this situation because we don't always get it right. And we all have really hard days. And one of the things we did in our household was it's okay to fail, and we're going to have a clean slate every day. And actually, my youngest child, who had the most behavioral issues, told me as he was a young adult that meant the most to him, that at the end of the day, no matter how much he screwed up, he knew we were going to start fresh the next day, even though he had to maybe address consequences. He knew he would get to start fresh. So model that by apologizing, cleaning that slate every day, forgiving that child, forgiving yourself, teaching the siblings how to do the same. Also modeling how to respond to others. I think Jeremy already talked about what's informed advocacy look like. So giving them the words to explain different behaviors or to stand up for their sibling. And then thirdly, I think celebrating the wins is critically important. You have to celebrate those small successes, and we'll talk about this a little later. Success builds on success. So once you've experienced that, even when there's an ebb or a flow to your day-to-day life, you remember that was there, and it kind of buoys you up for the next time you have to plan a new strategy or put something in place. Okay. This is something that I researched a long time ago when I was desperately looking for the magic bullet that would make sure all of my kids do well with ADHD, right? So the mom who's better than the FBI at doing research, right? Investigating everything I could under the sun. And of course, we all know there's no magic bullet. But one of the things I consistently found in all of the research that was out there was the comment that children do better based on the emotional health of the primary caregiver. And I think that's a huge statement. We have to remember as caregivers that you matter. So it's just like that proverbial phrase on the airlines that you got to put a mask on yourself before you can put it on your kids. If you aren't doing well, your child with or without ADHD is not going to do well either. So if you ignore your needs, you're not going to have success in the household. Okay, next. I think I'm doing this one too. So I like this slide because I think it's really important. And hopefully most of you know this, but every once in a while we'll have somebody that attends these talks that says, I needed to hear that. And that is, if you are a parent of a child with ADHD, you are stressed. You are stressed and chaos is part of your life. So that's, again, why you need to really take care of you.
And because, as Jane said, most of our days are spent in chaos, or, some part of our day or our week or our month may be spent in chaos. It is important to know that you can take care of you. And in fact, that is the one clear thing that we know for sure will help our kids with ADHD be successful. So we have to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of both our children with ADHD and our children without ADHD and all the things in between. And that means, taking care of your physical needs, giving yourself permission to work out, not feeling guilty, if you are not feeling guilty if at the end of a long workday, you decide to take a few minutes to yourself. These things are all okay, not only okay, but actually necessary for our kids to be healthy. And we want to model that, for all of our kids. It's important to take care of you. It's okay to take a break. I mentioned it earlier, but if you think you may be the adult with ADHD in the room, go ahead and get yourself diagnosed. But also, because this is hard and stressful, it's incredibly common for people to have depression and anxiety, and get that treated too. Not uncommon at all. In fact, I think it's that we talked about some of the numbers earlier, but high percentages, and rightly so. This is very stressful stuff. It is okay to take a break from your child. Like I said, there's been many times in my life where I have felt really guilty about having to go, speak at a conference or go to the gym, or, a lot of moms rightly, well, wrongly, put themselves last. We just do, because who else is going to get the stuff done? And we don't want to ask our kids, because that would be unfair. But just like Jane said earlier, taking care of ourselves is the essential piece of this.
Can you stand that slide for 1 second, Jeremy?
You bet.
I thought of something that we've never really addressed. Look at those two great couples, right?
Aren't we gorgeous? We're gorgeous.
Look at those spouses. So I think Jeremy and I are very, very lucky in that we both have very supportive spouses who do not have ADHD. So probably our next talk is going to have to be the unaffected spouse who does not have ADHD in the household. I can't say enough. I just can't give enough kudos to how supportive my husband is, especially with my ADHD. Can't be easy to live with, but on the other hand, I'm a lot of fun. So
it's never boring. That's true.
Never boring. So anyway, I just thought, we've never mentioned that before. And I just saw those pictures and thought, oh, they're two awesome men. So
yeah, for sure. And we are the exception. We've talked about
Yes.
that before. Yeah. I mean, that's a different talk. So we'll stick with
I want to go ahead and state the statistic because I think it's important. There's a high divorce rate among couples of any household with neurodiversity. And it's just because of those complex multi-stressors. Yeah, we are an exception to that.
But also because we're adult women who weren't diagnosed with ADHD until, later in life. And if you look at the research, I mean, we've been pretty fortunate in that for whatever reason, we were able to, complete our educations and, stay employed. And not everybody gets to do that. So we've been fortunate in lots of ways. But, it's not, there are definitely times when, just you and your spouse or your co-partner is not enough. Not only for you, but also for your kids. There's support groups for kids and support networks for kids also. And I'm not just talking about their peers. I'm talking about, like Jane mentioned, the extended family, the favorite aunt, maybe it's the cool teacher from school that babysits occasionally, building that support network. Our community is pretty fortunate that we do have a support group for teenagers with ADHD. And I believe Johnson County Mental Health has support groups for, family members of people impacted by neurodiversity. And so there's always another opportunity to get your kids who may not have neurodiversities involved with other kids so they can have a place to go and commiserate, because there's nothing, I mean, it kind of goes both ways, right? There's nothing more refreshing and validating than knowing what goes on in your house is going on in somebody else's house. And so for my daughter or my high school senior to be able to go to their friend's house or to go to whatever, an event, and hear, Joey talk about how his brother was being a jerk and he has ADHD and he knocked the TV over, however it shows up in your house, just knowing that it's happening someplace else normalizes it and also makes it okay for your kid to talk about. And so encourage those connections when you can. This is our support network, our extended support network. These are the people.
Aren't they all awesome? I just smile every time I see this picture.
Yeah. So this is just a little history.
So blessed.
A lot of the people that we've been fortunate enough to work with during our 10 years together so far.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to sum it up now. That's you, Jane, right?
No, that's you. You got that one. I got the next one.
Yeah, before the presentation, we're like, which one am I doing? Okay, you do that one. One of the beauties also of having ADHD is that you can put the presentation together at the last minute.
The last minute.
Sometimes it goes well, sometimes not. If not, don't tell us. So get yourself diagnosed again. We keep coming back to this one. Get your kids diagnosed. Jane and I both have done talks on the fact that we missed our daughters with ADHD. We were so focused on the boys with ADHD that we missed the daughters. And that's just another one of those pieces where we have to make our kids feel heard and recognize where they're coming from. And it may be that they showed up with anxiety and depression, but actually had ADHD the whole time. And it's okay to follow that through, even if the medical professionals in your life or the mental health professional says it's probably depression or anxiety. If something's not right and your kid's continuing to say, I'm having trouble focusing, it's okay to get a second opinion. And in fact, even if it's just to make sure that your child knows that you're supporting what they're saying and that you're hearing what they're saying. And so again, this is all the stuff that we just talked about, modeling communication, learning everything there is to know about ADHD, sharing that with your kids so that, when they're out and about and somebody says something not very nice about a kid with ADHD or, God forbid, one of the old school things, someone should spank your brother or your parents need to do XYZ with your sister. They have something to say in response. And hopefully, the parent is the one that gets to stand in and say that. But if a kid repeats what he hears his parents saying, then your kid's going to be armed with things to say as well. We talked about it not being, fair or equal necessarily, but being the thing that works best for the kid. Jane broke down one-on-one time into those, 3 really lovely components of spending, date night or date time with each kid when you can, and trying to keep a balance there, but then also spending time together as a family while honoring each kid's, special interest. I have 5 kids. It would be impossible for us to go and do 5 different things because again, that 5 times more healthcare expenditure, but we can do little things at home. and we try to, building your support team. I can't say enough about this. There's just something about being with your people. Jane and I get to go to the big international conference on ADHD every year, and we're surrounded by people with ADHD, and it is awesome. And providing that for your kids is awesome. And, sending them, your neurotypical kids, to conferences where they're surrounded by people who don't have any neurodiversity is probably great for them too. And this is the big forgiveness thing. And I love this because remember, I hate the whole, it's a journey, whatever, or the destination, or a marathon, but it truly is, it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day stuff and to think I'm failing as a parent, and for our kids to feel that way too. Like, this sucks. It's always going to suck. It's not going to get any better. But one of the things, just in the past, probably 3 years since we started doing this talk, Jane, when I interviewed my own kids for this talk, it was pretty painful. The things that they said, we knew that we hadn't done a great job because we didn't know what we were doing. But I think we thought that we'd done better than they thought we had. And yeah, it was actually pretty painful. And it was great to hear that Jane's experience was much more positive, and her kids, again, are about 10 years older than my kids. But right before we did this talk, I think it was yesterday, we were putting the slides together again, and all the kids were around because they haven't gone back to college yet, the older ones. And so I asked them all again, what do you think about this? How are you feeling now? And I don't know if they picked up on the fact that I was upset. We had the conversation 3 years ago and remembered that. Or what I really think happened is that, as they get older and do more things on their own and recognize, some of the challenges that they have lived through be it in college or adulting or, whatever that looks like, they've got a little bit more compassion and empathy looking back for what it was like to grow up, what it was like for everybody, and a better appreciation for their siblings' struggles. And so much more positive feedback the older they get. Doesn't mean that we did a great job. We didn't, we didn't know what we were doing. And most of us are hardwired to default to what our parents did. And you guys know this, when you go home as adult children, if your parents are still living and you get to go home for, Christmas or the holidays or whatever, it's easy to fall back into those, roles that you held when you were kids. It's really fascinating to watch happen, even if you're watching it happen in your own home. But we always learn something when that happens, either a memory or a reminder of kind of how we got to where we are. So hang in there, it gets better. Now it's you, Jane.
Well, and actually, I think you just kind of said what I was going to say here.
Oh, no, shoot, I'm sorry.
That's why we're twins, Jeremy.
That's why we're twins. That's true.
But I'll just elaborate on that then. I mean, what this slide reminds me of is, we're talking about all these different strategies to make sure everyone in the household is heard, because ADHD is a family thing. And again, as Jeremy mentioned, when we first started presenting, we were very different places. And I remember Jeremy saying exactly what she just told you, that she just almost felt sick because she didn't realize that the kids were that frustrated about things. And I told her that I could remember a time when my kids were the same way, and a time when I never thought they were going to be able to get along. So it's kind of nice that I'm in this other stage with the empty nest, and I could turn back and say, you know what, they are pretty good friends. And so we have had our successes. My kids are thriving. However, I want to go to the next slide because I want to mention this really quickly. They are thriving. We're flourishing. But life ebbs and flows. The family life ebbs and flows, stages ebb and flow. You maybe take 4 steps ahead and then 5 back. It just kind of fluctuates throughout our life. So for example, my youngest son got into college, and then he joined absolutely every organization there was because he was so thrilled to be in college. And then he, very shortly after that, had to leave college because he wasn't making the grades. Went back again the next year, right? Our success, he made it into college. We weren't sure that was going to happen. Didn't survive college again. So you kind of go back and forth. He's currently very gainfully employed as, I can't remember his title, but it's some kind of big financial thing with Camping World. So, he's happy, he's doing what he loves, and we get there. You kind of get there. And again, you build success upon success doing it that way. Another example is my daughter, who I, again, wasn't as tuned into as I should have, went off to college.
This is her.
Was really, yep, there she is. Was having a very I was having a very difficult time at home with her brother, and came to find out at the end of the year, because her brother ratted her out, she never told us, she had failed all of her courses. And we never would have found out except for the brother that ratted her out. However, she had a beautiful, wonderful advisor who she went in and talked to and mentioned that there was just a lot of stress going on in our home. And so he just told her, we're not going to have you leave school. We're going to have you come back. Let's put some things in place. And that was my cue then to spend more time with her and look at what she was doing. And now she is currently married. She does special childcare for special needs kids. Very happy, very successful gal. So again, I know you said you didn't like the word journey, but I do like to think of it. It is a journey, that ebbs and flows. And again, I can't emphasize enough that once you start experiencing successes and you celebrate those small successes, you can build on those, and they help you get through those harder times because better times are ahead.
Yeah, so, I love that. And I love what you said too about, kind of arming your kids with information about, so many of our kids take a different path after high school, and that they find the way that's best for them. And it may look different from what some of their same age peers are doing, and maybe different from what, their neurotypical sibling is doing and those peers are doing. And arming all of your family with verbiage around that is awesome. Just saying this is exactly where he needs to be, and this is why. I love that you guys did that. That's amazing. All right. The end. This is us. If you want to get a hold of us or if you have questions,
reach out anytime with questions.
Yes, we will.
Except I can't get into my email tonight. So my computer, I don't know, there's a gremlin in it because I've got a big box in the middle of the screen and I can't get into my email, but I will by tomorrow because I'm going to go and scream at IT. So
Yeah, so email Jane tomorrow. You can email me anytime.
email me tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I may respond and say, I received your email, but I can't get back to you till tomorrow. But I'll definitely let you know I got it. I won't leave you hanging. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share and we can answer any questions that you guys might have. And I'll probably turn off the recording so you guys can
Well,
feel.
while she's doing that, I just want to thank all of you for being here.
Yeah.
It's such a nice crowd. And, you know, I think the most inspiring thing for me when we go around talking is to meet people like you who care